A poor black mechanic in Bridgeport, Connecticut did something no specialist in Manhattan, no surgeon in Boston, and no engineer in Greenwich could do. He gave a Korean mafia boss's disabled daughter the one thing money had failed to buy, and he did it for free. He didn't know whose child she was, he didn't know what bloodline ran through her veins, and he didn't know that by the next morning, 95 men in black suits would be lining his street, engines running, waiting to do something that would shake his entire neighborhood to its core. But here's what no one expected. It wasn't violence. It wasn't revenge. It was something far more dangerous, because what they brought could never be taken back. Before the story goes any further, if you leave now, you will never find out what those 95 men did. And trust me, it will stay in your mind for days. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. One click, that's all it takes to never miss a story that hits this hard. The garage didn't have a proper name. The sign above the door had faded 3 summers ago, and nobody bothered to fix it. Tucked between a check-cashing place and a boarded-up laundromat off East Main Street in Bridgeport, it sat in the kind of neighborhood where ambulances took 40 minutes and pizza deliveries stopped at sundown. Ezra Tate ran it alone. 43 years old, hands scarred from 2 decades of engine work, arms stained with grease so deep it looked permanent. He opened at 6 every morning and locked up whenever the last car left. Some days that meant midnight. Some days that meant he slept on the concrete floor because the drive home wasn't worth the gas. Ezra was not a man who complained. He had learned early that complaining cost more than silence in a city that had already decided what a black man with no degree was worth. Customers came when they had no other choice. They questioned his prices. They watched his hands like he might steal parts from their own cars. One woman once counted her hubcaps before and after he changed her oil. He never said a word about it. He just fixed what was broken and waited for the next one. What nobody in that neighborhood knew, what Ezra never talked about, was that 10 years ago, his younger brother Terrence had been paralyzed from the waist down in a hit-and-run on I-95. The driver was never caught, insurance denied the claim, and the hospital discharged Terrence into a wheelchair that didn't fit his body, with instructions nobody in the family could afford to follow. Ezra taught himself wheelchair mechanics that year. Not from school, not from YouTube, from desperation. He rebuilt Terrence's chair using scrapyard parts, bicycle bearings, and a welding torch he borrowed from a man who owed him a transmission job. The chair wasn't pretty, but it worked. Terrence could move without pain for the first time in 11 months. That knowledge sat in Ezra's hands like a second trade, quiet, unpaid, waiting. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of cold that crawled under your jacket and stayed. Ezra was underneath a Ford F-150 when the shadow of something heavy blocked the light from the garage door. He rolled out and saw the first black SUV, then the second, then the third. 3 Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows so dark they looked like they had no glass at all. Connecticut plates, clean, expensive, the kind of vehicles that never stopped in this part of Bridgeport. Ezra's chest tightened. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his coveralls, scanning for exits the way his body had learned to do without thinking. A black man standing alone in a garage when unmarked SUVs pulled up, that equation had a history, and the history was never kind. The doors opened in unison. 6 men stepped out. All Korean, all wearing dark suits that didn't belong anywhere near East Main Street. Their shoes alone cost more than Ezra's monthly rent. They moved with coordination, not aggression, but the precision of people who were used to controlling every room they entered. One man walked ahead of the others, tall, mid-50s, silver streaking through black hair that was swept back like a blade. His face carried no expression. Not cold, not warm, just still, like a man who had trained himself to reveal nothing. This was Kang Jae-won. In Greenwich, he was a respected business investor, owner of a Korean-American trade firm that moved luxury goods between Seoul and Manhattan. His name appeared on donor walls at Yale New Haven Hospital and at the Korean Cultural Center in Stamford. But in the circles that ran beneath Connecticut's polished surface, Kang Jae-won was something else entirely. He controlled a network that stretched from Fort Lee, New Jersey to Providence, Rhode Island. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Kang spoke, rooms went quiet. When Kang made a decision, it didn't get questioned. And when Kang sent 3 Escalades to your door, you were either about to receive a gift or a goodbye. Ezra didn't know any of this. All he saw was 6 powerful men standing in his garage, and all his instincts told him to be careful. Then the rear door of the middle SUV opened, and a wheelchair ramp extended. She was small, 8 years old, thin arms, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that someone had tied with obvious care. Her eyes were sharp and wide, the kind that took in everything but said little. She sat in a motorized wheelchair that looked like it had been modified at least 4 or 5 times by people who tried hard but didn't understand what they were building. The left wheel alignment was off by nearly 2 inches. The seat base tilted forward, forcing her spine into a curve that would cause pain within an hour of sitting. The joystick controller was mounted on the wrong side for her dominant hand. The footrests were standard hospital issue, rigid, too high, pressing her knees upward at an angle that cut circulation. Ezra saw all of this in under 10 seconds, the same way a surgeon sees an X-ray, the same way a pianist hears a note out of tune. Her name was Minji. 3 years ago, a car accident on the Merritt Parkway had damaged her lower spinal cord. She was in the back seat. The impact came from the passenger side. She lost the use of both legs and most sensation below her hips. She was 5 years old. Kang Jae-won had spent over $400,000 in the 3 years since. Specialists at Yale New Haven Hospital, engineers at a private rehab facility in Boston, a custom wheelchair manufacturer in Manhattan that charged $60,000 for a chair that lasted 8 months before the electrical system failed. Every solution broke. Every expert said the same thing: we've done what we can. But a father who controls an empire does not accept those words easily. Kang's lieutenant, a man named Park Do-han, spoke first. He addressed Ezra directly. His English was perfect, his tone was polite, but carried no warmth. "We were told you do mechanical work, wheelchairs included." Ezra looked at Park, then at the men behind him, then at the girl. She was watching him, not with fear, not with hope, with something quieter. The patience of a child who had learned not to expect too much from adults who said they could help. That look broke something open in Ezra's chest. "Bring her inside," he said. Park hesitated. He looked back at Kang, who had not moved and had not spoken. Kang's eyes were locked on Ezra, measuring him. Not his skill, his character. After a moment, Kang gave a single nod. The men wheeled Minji into the garage. Her chair bumped hard over the concrete threshold. Her body jolted. She didn't flinch. She was used to it. That detail alone told Ezra everything. He knelt beside the chair. Not in front of Kang, not in front of the men with guns probably hidden beneath their jackets. He knelt in front of an 8-year-old girl, and he spoke to her directly. "I'm going to look at your chair. I won't touch you without asking first. If anything feels wrong, you tell me. Deal?" Minji studied his face. Then she nodded. Ezra pulled a flashlight from his back pocket and began examining the undercarriage. The frame was titanium alloy. Expensive, but poorly welded at 2 stress points. The motor housing had been replaced with a unit designed for a heavier chair, which meant the torque was wrong for her weight. The battery drained fast because the motor overcompensated constantly. He checked the seating. The cushion was medical grade, but mounted on a base that didn't match the chair's original specifications. Someone had forced compatibility. It worked on paper. It failed on a child's body. Ezra stood up. He looked at Park. Who built this? Apex Mobility Systems, Manhattan. Ezra had never heard of them. He didn't need to. The chair told him everything about their priorities. It was built for appearances, for a brochure, not for a girl who had to live in it 16 hours a day. "How long do I have?" Ezra asked. Park glanced at Kang. "We return tomorrow." Kang spoke for the first time. His voice was low, controlled. Each word carried weight, like a man who had learned that language was a weapon. "If the chair does not work," Kang said, "we will not return." That sentence had two meanings. Ezra heard both. The men left, the SUVs pulled away, the street returned to silence. Ezra looked at Minji's wheelchair sitting in the center of his garage, surrounded by engine parts and oil stains. A $60,000 machine built by Manhattan engineers, and it didn't work for the one person it was supposed to serve. He locked the garage door, he turned off his phone, and he got to work. Ezra stripped the chair down to its frame by 9 that night. Every bolt, every wire, every joint laid out across his workbench like a patient on an operating table. He rebuilt the base first, realigned the wheel axles using a method he had developed for Terrence's chair, a technique no manual taught because no manual was written for a man who couldn't afford the right parts. He repositioned the motor housing to match Minji's exact weight, which he estimated from the compression marks on the original cushion. He rewired the joystick controller to the left side. He shortened the footrests by 2 inches and angled them to release pressure on her knees. He replaced the battery leads with heavier gauge wire to reduce heat loss. At midnight, he started on the seat. He didn't have medical-grade foam. What he had was memory foam from an old mattress topper his neighbor had thrown out last spring. He cut it, layered it, shaped it to match the curve of a child's lower spine. He covered it with vinyl from a car seat he had reupholstered 2 weeks ago. At 2 in the morning, he tested the chair's turning radius. Too wide. He adjusted the differential, tested again. Smoother. He ran it across the cracked pavement outside, listening to every sound, the way he listened to engines, not for what was right, but for what was almost wrong. At 4 in the morning, he added something that wasn't in any spec sheet, a small vibration dampening system between the seat and the base, built from rubber mounts designed for truck cabins. It would absorb the shock of every sidewalk crack, every curb, every bump that had been jolting Minji's spine for 3 years. By 5:30, Ezra sat on the concrete floor with his back against the wall. His hands were raw, his shoulders ached, his eyes burned from hours of close work under a single fluorescent light. The chair sat in front of him. It didn't look like a $60,000 machine anymore. It looked like something a father would build, imperfect on the outside, relentless on the inside. He had spent $340 of his own money. That was his grocery budget for the next 2 weeks. He didn't think about that. He thought about Terrence, about the first time his brother had rolled his mother's kitchen without wincing. Some things cost more than money, and some things are worth more than being paid. Right now, most people would scroll away. Most people would never stay long enough to find out what happens when those 95 men see what Ezra built with his bare hands. Don't be most people. Subscribe to Tales by Wave, because the next 60 seconds of this story will change how you see the world. Morning didn't arrive gently. It arrived with the sound of engines. Not one, not two, dozens. The low, synchronized rumble of vehicles moving in formation, filling the narrow street outside like a military convoy rolling through a village. Ezra was still inside. He heard it before he saw it. The vibration rattled his tool rack. The fluorescent light swayed. Through the gap in the garage door, he saw shadows multiplying. He pushed the door open, and his breath stopped. 95 vehicles stretched in both directions. Black SUVs, black sedans, a few armored cars with plates from Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, bumper to bumper, silent except for idling engines. Men in dark suits stood beside their vehicles, not moving, not speaking, arms at their sides, watching. The entire neighborhood froze. Curtains parted, front doors cracked open. A woman across the street pulled her child inside and locked the deadbolt. An old man on the corner dropped his newspaper. A bodega owner reached under his counter for his phone and started recording. Ezra's heart hammered. He counted the men, stopped at 60. There were more behind the SUVs. Some stood on the sidewalk, some leaned against cars with the calm patience of men who had done this before. 95 men. All Korean, all dressed identically, all radiating the particular silence that comes from organized power. Ezra had survived 43 years in a country that had taught him to read danger in the way people stood, in the space between a smile and a fist. Every survival instinct he possessed told him to step back inside. But then the center SUV opened, and Minji rolled out. She was sitting in his chair, the one he had rebuilt from nothing, the one he had poured 9 straight hours into while the city slept. She was sitting upright, fully upright, for what looked like the first time in years. Her spine was straight, her hands rested on the armrests without gripping. Her face was different. She was smiling. Not the careful smile of a child who had learned to hide discomfort. A real smile, the kind that starts in the chest. Kang Jae-won stepped forward behind her. He walked toward Ezra, slowly. Every man on that street watched. Then Kang did something that made 95 men hold their breath. He bowed. Not a nod, not a handshake, a full, deliberate bow. The kind in Korean culture means you are standing in front of someone you consider above yourself. The leader of the most feared organization on the East Coast bowed to a mechanic in a grease-stained coverall on a broken sidewalk in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Silence swallowed the street. And then Kang spoke. His voice carried, quiet but heavy as iron. In 3 years, I have paid specialists, engineers, and surgeons across 4 states. None of them gave my daughter what you gave her in one night. He paused. You gave her comfort, you gave her dignity, and you did it without knowing who I am, without asking for payment, and without hesitation. Ezra didn't move. My men are not here to frighten you, Kang said. They are here because I told them what you did, and every one of them wanted to be present for what comes next. If this moment doesn't move you, nothing will. But if you're the kind of person who feels this, who understands what it means when someone's invisible kindness finally gets seen, then you belong here. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. We don't just tell stories, we feel them together. Park Do-han stepped forward holding a black leather briefcase. He opened it. Inside was cash, stacked, banded, more money than Ezra had seen in his entire life. $50,000. Ezra stared at it. Then he looked at Minji. She was rolling her chair in a small circle on the sidewalk, testing the turning radius, laughing when the wheels responded exactly where she wanted them to go. I don't want that, Ezra said. Park blinked. In his world, no one refused money from Kang Jae-won. Kang studied Ezra's face for a long time, not with suspicion, with something closer to recognition, like he was seeing a version of honor he had almost forgotten existed. Then what do you want? Kang asked. Ezra thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about Terrence, about the insurance company that said his brother's comfort wasn't medically necessary, about every child in every neighborhood like his who sat in a wheelchair that hurt him every single day, not because no one can fix them, because nobody thinks they're worth fixing. He looked at Kang. If you want to do something, help me fix their chairs. The street was silent. Park looked at Kang. The other men shifted slightly. This was not the answer they had prepared for. Kang's jaw tightened, not in anger, in something Ezra couldn't read. Then Kang turned to Park and said 3 words in Korean. Park's eyes widened. Sir. Do it, Kang repeated in English. His voice left no room for discussion. What Kang ordered was a full renovation of Ezra's garage, new equipment, proper tools, a dedicated space for wheelchair repair and custom builds, funded entirely by the organization. No strings, no logos, no publicity. But that was only the beginning. Within 2 weeks, contractors arrived. Not city contractors, Kang's people. They worked fast, quiet, and precise. The garage expanded into the empty lot next door. New walls went up, a hydraulic lift was installed, specialized welding equipment appeared overnight. Ezra didn't ask where it came from. Some questions are better left unanswered when the answers come in black SUVs. Word spread the way it always does in tight neighborhoods, through whispers, then conversations, then lines at the door. The first mother came carrying her son on her hip. He was 4, cerebral palsy. His wheelchair was a rusted hand-me-down from a hospital that had closed 2 years ago. The seat was too wide, the wheels stuck. The boy had bruises on his thighs from the metal frame. Ezra rebuilt it in 6 hours. He charged nothing. The second family came from Hartford, twins, both in wheelchairs, both in chairs designed for adults, not children. Their spines were curving from years of improper support. A specialist in New Haven had quoted $18,000 per chair. Ezra rebuilt both in 2 days. He charged nothing. By the end of the first month, Ezra had repaired or rebuilt 14 wheelchairs, every one of them for a child, every one of them free. The local paper ran a story, then a Hartford news station, then a reporter from the New York Times drove down to Bridgeport and spent 3 days in the garage watching Ezra work, talking to the families. The headline read, "The Mechanic Who Fixes What America Forgot." The story exploded. Donations poured in from across the country. GoFundMe campaigns launched without Ezra's permission. Messages came from parents in Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, Los Angeles, all asking the same question: can you help my child? But not everyone was grateful. Success made Ezra visible, and visibility in Bridgeport came with a cost. The city's Department of Housing and Urban Development flagged the garage expansion as an unauthorized modification to a commercially zoned property. Fines were issued, a cease and desist letter arrived, an inspector showed up on a Wednesday morning and told Ezra he had 30 days to return the property to its original footprint or face seizure. Ezra read the letter 3 times. Behind the legal language, he could see the real message. A developer named Whitfield Crane Capital had been buying property along East Main Street for months. They wanted the block, they wanted the land, and a mechanic with a suddenly famous garage was standing in the way of a mixed-use luxury development that would bring condos, coffee shops, and higher tax revenue. Ezra couldn't afford a lawyer. He couldn't fight City Hall. He had survived 43 years by keeping his head down, doing good work, and not making enemies. Now, the system that had ignored him his entire life was finally paying attention, and it wanted him gone. He sat in his garage that night, alone, staring at the cease and desist letter. He thought about giving up, about closing the door, walking away, letting the city take what it always takes from people who look like him and live where he lives. Then, his phone rang. They want to tear his garage down. They want to erase everything he built. And right now, Ezra is sitting alone in the dark, wondering if any of it mattered. If you've ever felt like the world punishes you for doing the right thing, stay with this story. Subscribe to Tales by Wave, because what happens next, the city never saw it coming. The voice on the phone was Park Do-han's. "Mr. Tate, Mr. Kang is aware of your situation." Ezra closed his eyes. "I didn't ask for help." "You didn't need to." The next morning, 3 things happened before Ezra finished his coffee. First, a law firm in Stamford, Peterson, Yu and Associates, filed an injunction against the city's cease and desist order. The injunction cited improper notice, discriminatory enforcement patterns, and failure to apply equal code scrutiny to neighboring commercial properties. The filing was 37 pages long. It had been prepared overnight. Ezra had never met anyone at Peterson, Yu and Associates. He didn't need to. The firm was on retainer for Kang's trade company, and when Kang made a call, the firm didn't ask questions. Second, the New York Times reporter published a follow-up story. This one wasn't about wheelchairs. It was about the city's attempt to shut down a black mechanic who was providing free services to disabled children in one of Connecticut's poorest neighborhoods. The article mentioned the Whitfield Crane development by name. It included housing discrimination experts. It included a photograph of the cease and desist letter taped to Ezra's garage door. The story went viral before noon. The city's mayor received 11,000 emails by sundown. Third, and this is the part no one predicted, Kang Jae-won walked into the city council meeting that evening. Not Park, not a lawyer, Kang himself. He wore a dark suit, no jewelry, no entourage. He sat in the back row of a room filled with city officials, developers, and concerned residents, and he waited. When public comment opened, Kang walked to the microphone. The room went silent. Several council members recognized him, not from the news, from donor dinners, from fundraisers at Yale New Haven Hospital, from charity galas in Greenwich where his name appeared on brass plaques. Kang spoke for 4 minutes. He did not raise his voice, he did not threaten, he did not mention his organization, his influence, or his resources. He spoke only about Minji, about her wheelchair, about the 16 specialists who had failed her, about a mechanic in a crumbling garage who succeeded where wealth had not. Then he said something that made 3 council members lower their eyes. In my culture, when a man saves your child's dignity, you protect his. If this city destroys his garage, you are telling every person in this room that compassion has no place where profit lives. He paused. I am asking you to consider what kind of city you want to build, one that rewards the people who care, or one that removes them when they become inconvenient. He returned to his seat. The room was still. The vote came 4 days later. The cease and desist was withdrawn, the zoning complaint was dismissed, Whitfield Crane quietly redirected its development to another block. Ezra's garage remained. But something much larger had shifted. Within 6 months, the garage that once had no name became the Tate Mobility Center. It wasn't a hospital, it wasn't a non-profit with a board and a mission statement. It was still a concrete building with oil stains on the floor and fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. But it worked. Ezra hired 3 assistants, all young men from Bridgeport, all black, all told at some point in their lives that their hands were built for trouble, not precision. He taught them the way he had learned, by listening, by failing, by paying attention to the small things everyone else overlooked. Kang's organization provided funding, quietly, no press conferences, no branded events. Once a month, a wire transfer appeared in the account. The amount varied, but it was always enough. Kang visited once every 2 months, always with Minji. She was 9 now. She had outgrown the first chair Ezra built her, so he built her a second one, then a third, each one lighter, faster, more responsive than the last. On one visit, Minji rolled up to Ezra while he was underneath a chassis. She tapped his boot with her footrest. He slid out, covered in grease. "What's up?" She handed him a drawing. It was crayon on construction paper. 2 figures, one tall with brown skin and big hands, one small in a wheelchair with a yellow sun behind her. Underneath, in wobbly handwriting, it said, "Mr. Ezra fixed my legs." Ezra stared at that for a long time. He didn't cry, not in front of her, but he taped it to the wall above his workbench, and it stayed there for years, through expansions, through news crews, through visits from senators and surgeons who wanted to study his methods. That drawing outlasted everything. The numbers told a story of their own. In the first year, the Tate Mobility Center repaired or rebuilt 218 wheelchairs, 94% of them for children, 81% for families below the federal poverty line. 0 of them were charged. Insurance companies started calling, not to donate, to learn. Ezra's repairs lasted an average of 4 years. The industry standard was 18 months. His cost per chair was 1/8 of the commercial average. A biomedical engineering team at Yale reached out. They wanted to study his vibration dampening system, the one he built from truck cabin mounts at 4 in the morning while the rest of the city slept. They called it an elegantly simple solution to a problem the industry had overcomplicated for decades. Ezra called it common sense. The partnership between Ezra and Kang puzzled people. Reporters wrote about it carefully, always circling the same question. How does a black mechanic from Bridgeport end up allied with a Korean businessman whose reputation carries shadows? Neither man answered that question publicly. But in private, on the nights when Kang visited after hours and sat in the garage with Ezra drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, the answer was simple. "You didn't see my daughter as a problem to solve," Kang once said. "You saw her as a person who deserved to move without pain." Ezra nodded. "That's all anyone wants." This isn't just a story. This is proof that what you do when nobody's watching is what defines your life. If you believe in that, if you're the kind of person who refuses to scroll past moments like this, then Tales by Wave was built for you. Subscribe. Not for me, for every story like Ezra's that deserves to be heard. The city changed, but not overnight and not without resistance. Some people could never accept the image of a Korean mafia money funding a black man's workshop. They called it suspicious. They called it a front. They questioned Ezra's motives. They whispered that Kang was laundering money through a wheelchair shop. The whispers never became proof, because there was no proof, only projection. What was real was the mother from New Haven who said her son slept through the night for the first time in 2 years after Ezra rebuilt his chair. What was real was the teenager from Stamford who rolled across her high school graduation stage in a chair Ezra had built for her body, not for a medical catalog. What was real was the 70-year-old veteran from Hartford who wept in the garage doorway when Ezra adjusted his chair in 45 minutes, solving a comfort problem the VA had told him was untreatable. What was real was Minji, now 10 years old, visiting every month, rolling through the garage with the confidence of a child who had finally stopped apologizing for the space her wheelchair took up. And what was real was this: a Korean man whose world operated in silence and a black man whose world operated in survival had built something together that neither could have built alone. Not a business, a bridge between cultures that rarely spoke, between worlds that never touched, between two men who had every reason to distrust each other and chose not to. Ezra never called himself a hero. He called himself a mechanic who fixed what was broken. Kang never called himself a savior. He called himself a father who found the right man at the right time. And Minji, the girl at the center of it all, never called the chair a miracle. She called it home. But this story doesn't end here, because 6 months after the Tate Mobility Center opened, Kang Jae-won made a phone call, not to his lawyers, not to his lieutenants, to Ezra. And what he asked changed everything again. What was that phone call about? That story is coming, but only if you're here to hear it.